Hey, the only promise I've kept so far my entire time on YouTube. Right, so I am filming this after a very long hiatus. I think the last time I posted a video was about 3 months ago, I believe. That's a very long time, and I did it because, well, YouTube just stopped being that enjoyable. It wasn't very fun at that time because I was constantly in this mental loop. I was not in a very good place mentally at the time where I thought that if this YouTube channel literally wasn't getting thousands of views per video, then my YouTube channel isn't worth continuing to work on, and that I should just quit and go on to. Sorry, Microsoft just opened in front of me. That's very dumb. But the what I'm trying to say is that um, I was just having way too high expectations on myself and kind of missing the point of what makes people of what it takes to maintain a YouTube career. It's not about being the most successful YouTuber. It's just about putting the time and the work into it and really grinding at that axe, being consistent, trying new things, and seeing what sticks, and just putting yourself and your passion into this and not expecting anything out of it because let's be honest, YouTube is a pipe dream and only a passion project nowadays. Enough of that not emotional, inspirational bullshit. Why am I back? And the reason why I'm back is mostly because I just want to have some fun on YouTube again. I want to post videos and stuff. My hair is longer now. It's very beautiful, and I'm nice and shaved. I cleaned up. I lost some weight more recently, and now that I'm in a lot of better of a mental place, and I've been sorting myself out. I want to get back to like something I really want to do. That kind of was one of my main inspirations to get onto YouTube, which was to just make commentary, just ramble, rant kind of content. I'm a rant tuber, but nah, I'm not really. But um, yeah, I just kind of just wanted to make my own kind of content, and if people like listening to that stuff where I just kind of ramble on about whatever I feel like talking about, then that's pretty nice. And this video is going to be about one of those things I want to ramble about, which is about my personal project that I'm working on. So, in my private life, I am. I think I already made a video on this already. And no, wait, yes, I have. And it's about me writing my own book. Okay, let me fix this a little bit so the camera work. I am writing my own personal book called The Soul Economy, and basically it's a political satire slash fantasy adventure novel about this person called Jack, who's from Limbo, and they are one day hired by God herself and the afterlife to go down to the mortal realm in order to save Britain, in order to in turn save the afterlife's economy, which runs on souls. And that's just kind of the basic premise of it, but it's also going to be a bit of a meta commentary about the relationship of writing and creating and creation, and just about power dynamics and economics, politics, social commentary, and so on and so forth. It's going to be a pretty big project, and I actually wanted to talk a lot about that because during that time I've had a lot of personal learning experiences through that work, and I hope to kind of share some of them with you guys, try to see if maybe you guys can get something out of my own trials and tribulations, and just kind of shoot the shit about it and just have some fun. The first thing I want to kind of go into is about my media influences for the soul economy. Um in the original version of it, yes, there's an original version, I'll explain that later. My main influences were stuff like Terry Pratchett's Discworld stuff, um the Adventure Time series. I really liked The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, that sort of pseudo historical book. No, it's not a pro Nazi book, I promise you. Anyway, and there was also Musashi, that sort of uh, historical tale book. There was a lot of video game influences on there, so I got stuff like Dishonored and Undertale, Deltarune, and stuff like that, and some elements of the Metal Gear Solid series, and Yes Minister. So really, a whole broad range of stuff. So I had that sort of broad range of inspiration, and I wanted to expressly mention this because in some of my original works, I had this really bad habit of, because I have autism, so I have hyperfixations and stuff like that. And a few years ago, I used to get really be into Metal Gear Solid, just the entire series and stuff like that. And I thought it was the greatest thing ever made. But also Avatar: The Last Airbender. So I combined those two things to create like there were two separate works. One was called The Kingdom of the Sky, and the other is called Revolver Queen. And the problem with those two works is that I was merely mimicking and kind of copying what those two series did and importing those things into my own work, but not without putting my own unique spin on it or trying to adapt those things or trying to fix my own technical writing craft or trying to or just taking inspiration from them and making my own unique thing. No, I would literally try to mimic and copy everything those series did. So in the Kingdom of the Sky, I really just kind of overtook that sort of stupid adventure big world thing when one, I hadn't properly created the world, and two, I gave like the audience. It's not published or anything. I'm just imagining how it would go. But I, with an audience, I didn't give anybody a reason to really care about the adventure, so that was a flop, and I gave up on it eventually. But secondly, for the Revolver Queen, I really took way too much from two specific sources for that. First was Metal Gear, as I mentioned, but the second one was it was like something between either the Lord of the Rings, Dishonored, or some other no, Suzerain, the sort of politics game where you play as the president of Swordland. But anyway, I really took from those two works. But the problem with that in that case was that one, I was way too invested in my own lore, and I wanted to shove in every single idea in the first 50 pages because I thought I was just that brilliant, which I really wasn't. I was basically just trying to force you guys to love the world the same way I did at the time. And it's kind of like what happened with the Age of Scorpius with Milo Winters when they basically created a book world. They said they made it for like 10 years, but they wrote a book, and over that 10 years, they basically wrote a story, but made it so convoluted and weird that I think a very prominent criticism, and I believe it comes from the writer, the YouTuber Crimson Rogue, their criticism was that that Milo Winters assumed that we, the reader, had the same knowledge about the world of Guardian as they did. And I was under that same assumption when I wrote The Revolver Queen, when that simply wasn't the case. When that simply, it was the exact same case. But this was a couple years before that scandal, so I mean, I walked so Milo Winters could run. Now, how does this relate to the soul economy and inspiration? Well, the thing I did first was broaden my horizons, consume a lot more media, get into a lot more things, try to branch out my interests and so on, and try not to just focus on like video games or films, but also get back into reading, do some research on topics I'm really passionate about, and all that kind of came together to inform the soul economy, which the funny thing is that the soul economy, it didn't come about because like, oh, I really wanted to write something about this. No, I I was using ChatGPT to basically make a game from like the 90s and stuff, like one of those text games, and I would use ChatGPT for that. because yeah, okay, it was just fun. And I made like a Spy X Family role play where I created this idea for this character named Jack, who's like this translucent skeletal woman coming down to Ostania in order to kill Donovan Desmond before he destroyed the world and ruined the tax revenue of souls and so on. And it was through that really dumb role play that I eventually just thought, hey, why don't I try writing this down on a separate Google Doc and formulate a story idea from it? And eventually became the Soul Economy after a couple years. Well, I didn't touch it for about a year or so, but then I think last year or the year before that, I really wanted to write something new because I was really kind of suffering from the Revolver Queen book that I was writing, and I wanted to write something new and fun. So I got started on writing the Soul Economy, and I wrote basically an almanac, like kind of like what they do for in video game studios with like loads of lore and stuff like that. They have like a big story Bible. I basically wrote that to help formulate my thoughts and how the world would work. And I looked at a bunch of media and influences I had for this idea, and through combining those two things, I was able to formulate the plot, the characters, and idea for the Soul Economy. Now, the problem with this is that with my influences, my inspirations, and passions of what allowed me to write the Soul Economy, the biggest issue with this was that I was way too stuck on my own arse about these ideas and inspirations that I crammed in every single idea into the first draft of the Soul Economy, just like what I did with the Revolver Queen. So it created this situation where I was repeating what I did last time, but this time for the Soul Economy, it was way worse because I would literally just reference these things all over the place. You get references to Death Stranding, um, Dishonored, Yes Minister, Naughty's Britain television shows, video game references, video game characters, books, so on, and concepts. And it was just like, Jesus Christ, that's way too much stuff. And now I can like I think a month ago or something like that, I look back on this problem and I'm like, holy crap, this is not good. You know, the plot is incomprehensible. The prose is way too long and full of itself. It's way too hard trying to be quirky. It's trying to make you the audience. It's trying to force you into really liking the book. And for myself, I could hardly get through my own writing. So I stopped writing for a little bit and got back to just doing what I love, which is mostly video games, films, and horror stories. And I actually found new inspirations for how to rewrite the Soul Economy for the version I'm currently writing now. And they came from a few interesting places. I got K-pop Demon Hunters. I really like that film. It's really fun. Um, Deltarune, which I actually got into recently playing. Um, I'll make a separate video about that game sometime. Um, Power with Purpose, which is an autobiography about Gordon Brown, the prime minister between 2007 to 2010. But one of the most influential ones was Bloodborne. Now, this doesn't mean I suddenly took the Soul Economy into a horror direction, but I took a lot of elements of what I liked about those media pieces and implemented them into the Soul Economy whilst I worked on my technical skills to really improve the quality and the story of the Soul Economy. The second thing I did in order to help benefit my writing more was to really integrate myself more with my country, which is England. I've moved here officially, but I was always obsessed with this country since I was like 4 years old because my father is English. He was born in Watford, and so I've been trying to assimilate myself better with this country in a lot of aspects and studying it. From things like politics, history, but most importantly, culturally and physically. Now, what do I mean by those last 2 points? Well, when I say culturally, I mean like trying to understand the mindset and the context of like your average Brit. Because, you know, for all the jokes made about this country, and, you know, quite amusing, um, Britain is still a place with its own thoughts and feelings on a load of things, which explains why it is the way it is. You know, why we always get these why we always get these tales and stories about a really witty, sardonic, sad, self-deprecating, but also hateful, but also kind, inspirational, innovative, but also s- imperialistic, forward thinking, but also backwards place. I'm not saying any of this to make fun of England and Britain more generally. I'm just stating things that I came to notice over time the more I stopped thinking about things like, oh, how's the Tories doing? To how do the people of Britain think? Why did they feel this way? What is the cultural context of a lot of things? And why they have these mindsets, these attitudes, and so on and so forth. And that was a way more interesting thing, rabbit hole to go down than just like politics or whatever. Because, I mean, people say, like, oh, culture informs politics. Pol- c- Culture informs politics, and politics doesn't inform culture. And I think that's particularly true. And I think if a lot more people went into how culture works, and I don't mean just in Britain, but I mean all over the place, I think that would be able to see a lot more change in questions and discussions being made instead of just like, oh, right winger or left winger or whatever the fuck. But there was a second thing I mentioned, which is physically. Um, I'm very fortunate to be living in the southwest of the country. I'm not going to specify where because that would be doxing myself, but it's honestly a very physically lovely looking place if you're leaving outside of a settlement or something like that. You know, you got big rolling countrysides, forests dotted around the place, lakes, rivers. You got the ocean nearby. Um, it's a very beautiful place overall. But when you look away, when you look away from the countryside and to the actual places where people live, it's a way different story. I mean, I live in a place where the high street is becoming quieter and a bit more decrepit, but it's one of the luckier ones because all over the place, communities are just slowly dying off, and the economy is just becoming way more unfair to people, people in need especially. uh, families and children and the elderly and so on. There's not that much happiness in a lot of moments most of the time. I mean, sure, there's a few special events like, say, festivals or special days or community events, but otherwise, you know, you're really walking around a place that just feels like it's just quiet and lonely, even though it could be very crowded at times. Everybody's in their own head, and the physical state of like many towns and communities is just not very welcoming anymore. I mean, in the Southwest, it's a bit better because many of the communities look very nice, if you go down the high streets or whatever. But if you were to go to other parts of the country, it's just not that at all. I mean, I used to go to Plymouth University for a while. Hate it now. Um, I used to go there for writing classes and so on. And that city is just so ugly. It's a representation of just how physically miserable Britain can be in some places. You just got concrete jungles everywhere, massive soulless buildings, shops of like vapes or so on, high streets that are seldom used and are more and malls are more preferred. Um, Communities that just are like la quiet and kind of messy in some places where people just don't feel safe in them. And that's not even going to things like the climate or the environment or whatever. I mean, we all get horror stories all the time of like how the countryside is like to say our water supply is getting filthier because of the companies and how the privatized water system works. Or we just had a heat wave recently and thousands of people have died from it because most homes in Britain don't have AC on. But even if that wasn't the case, it was just how hot it was. It was oppressive. It was miserable. You couldn't go outside safely without feeling like you were gonna die. And really getting outside and feeling these things really contributed to helping me at giving a clearer picture about why I wanted to write the soul economy. It was less about trying to make a weird, quirky world about souls and economics and so on. I wanted to also tell a very British story set in this country that, despite all of it, I really do care about very much from the bottom of my heart. And I really want to talk about Britain and e- exaggerate some of its, well, exaggerate and portray certain issues with it for a general audience and really try to understand this place kind of like as a sort of adventure in and of itself. Sorry, I closed the door just now. It's I was just airing it out because I had a shower beforehand. But um, in relation to the whole tangent about going out and learning more about England and Britain, the reason why I said that is that I'm writing a British story, and I want to be able to learn and express my thoughts and observations about this place, and try to have a conversation with not only English people but also with people who, like myself, came here and are trying to integrate and understand. And it really was really helpful personal learning experience and journey. And I'm going to be genuine. If you want to write about the real world, real places, and try to discuss complicated topics and so on about your country or another person's country, you should do your best to learn, read, talk to, watch um, media from that country or the culture making institutions of that country. You should talk to everyday people and have conversations about, how they feel, how they think, what they do, why they do it, and try to understand as much as you can. And not just for writing purposes, but you should do it just in general in your life. And it'll be really helpful if you do. I wonder how this is gonna look in video, but for me, that door is just like the door to heaven right there. But the final few things I wanted to talk about. The first thing is about the technical side of writing. When I was looking through the original version of the book, which is about 24 chapters long. No, wait, 23. Sorry. It was about 23 chapters long. And it was about 445 pages last I checked. The thing about it is that it's not the worst thing in the world. It out of all the works I've written so far, it's one of my better ones by a long shot. But the problem with it is that I'm cramming way too many ideas. It's kind of incomprehensible in some places. I don't know exactly what I'm trying to say. I'm way too invested in my own lore and my arse. I'm in my ego. And instead of writing for an audience, I am writing for myself first and foremost. Because I think if I remember once, I heard a piece of advice that was like, write for you and then the audience will come after. And that's kind of true to some extent. All creative expressions are written for you and for first and foremost. But if you're trying to write a creative expression and then share it with the rest of the world, you need to be capable of giving up some of that thought and instead write for others, which I got from a YouTube channel called Nick Carlson Press. I highly recommend to check him out. But in light of that, I looked through the 23 chapters I had written and I realized that most of this was shit. So I wanted to rewrite it totally from scratch to change a lot of things, fix character tones, remove the fucking weird Rick and Morty reference crap, the meta commentary, the constant quirkiness, and so on. I wanted to get rid of all of that. Sorry, that was my phone. Probably some kind of email or whatever. Anyway, when I cut all that out, I realized I need to figure out how I'm going to be able to edit. Because if there's something I will be genuine about here for a second, when it comes to writing something and then looking back, sometimes for some people, the hardest thing that can be done is editing. And for a long time, it was hard for me because I thought I was in this weird headspace that every single sentence I wrote, if I were to get rid of even one thing, I would be destroying my own work. But here's the problem with that thinking. Sometimes, in order to improve your work, you have to sacrifice a lot of it. And once you remove a bunch of things that are just totally unneeded, um, like weird concepts, characters that don't really fit the tone, uh, co- ideas and chapters, sometimes even entire sections of the book, you'll have to get rid of some of that in order to make sure that the story that you want to tell, the themes you want to tell, the message you want to express can survive and be listened to. Because if you don't edit your thing and cut some things that definitely need to be cut, um, well, you're not going to be able to achieve much. So, as a genuine piece of editing advice to help you out, um, I keep a journal to the side of me here. This is my personal journal. I use this journal in order to um, look at specific sections of my book. I'm doing it chapter by chapter at the moment, but I go through each of these chapters that I've written, and I what's it called? Plan out edits. Decide if I need to remove entire chapters. Fix character tone, and so on and so forth. I mean, as an example, yeah. Here's an example. This is the notes for chapter 1 on this page. In this page I list out um what I should talk about in conversations, fix characters, fix the tone, the emotions, and the story beat. And, you know, for that it was a prologue and all that stuff, but the more and more I go on, I use more and more pages to plan out each and every chapter. And that editing process, this process of editing has been very helpful and very good so far. For me personally, I think for some of you it may work, but otherwise, if you're gonna edit, you should keep something right there and close to the side. Don't open another Google Doc because I don't know, it just sounds like more work. If you keep a notebook to the side of you, meanwhile, you'll have quick and easy access. You'll be able to easily just write down things that you want to get rid of, and it's just a quick reference points and stuff like that. And, it's just way more tidy and stuff like that. So instead of having to open like a bunch of Google Docs or having to make the if you don't want to mess up your own whatever you're writing on, like a Google Doc, for instance, by having to put notes and stuff like that, keep something like this next to you. But in some cases where you want to rewrite your entire book entirely, I would open a new Google Doc and write it from there with this by your side, but also keep the original open for compare and contrast. Because there's some elements that from the original version of the solo comic that I do want to keep in there, like some chapter beats and so on. But, I want to rewrite it entirely because I really just don't like how it turned out in the end. So, yeah, there's some editing advice and so on. If there's another thing that I realized when it comes to writing the soul economy and so on, that I really had a long time struggling with, it's character work and character writing and dialogue. And my main problems with how I wrote is that I kept doing it like it was a script. My goal for my characters is to be authentic, unique in each person's dialogue, and also to be able to speak realistically, like how people do in actual conversations. And the way I figured this out, back then in the original version of the book, it would just be like person asks question, person provides answer, person asks another question, person provides answer, and someone spurts out an opinion, so on and so forth. It's kind of like video game dialogue, and in some mediums that's fine, like video games, for instance. But when you're writing something like a book and you're trying to be as authentic and realistic as you can with dialogue in your writing, that's not going to cut it. And I learned that the hard way when I look back on my own dialogue writing, and I realize, fucking hell, this sucks. So what did I do to help that out? Um, when writing out dialogue, firstly you got to plan out your conversation. Planning out your conversation is, I think, the most important thing to do first, because you can plan out a broad chapter, but if you don't figure out the main points of the conversation and the beats and arcs of that conversation, you're like, oh, one part is going to be calm, but another is going to be angry. You need to plan that out and figure out, okay, why is this going to happen? What's the series of events? What's the cause and effect? But to actually write the dialogue, in that you're going to have to use a lot of your own head and imagination. And when it comes to imagining how dialogue works, imagine you're like watching a television show in your head, but it's the characters in the scene you are creating. When you The best time to do it is when you actually, like, when you have a moment to think, when you're alone, when you're not doing anything, when you're in the shower or in bed. Just imagine these scenes playing in your head. Try to imagine the story beats and think just imagine you're like playing for yourself a television show in your own head, you know. And when you come back to the writing desk, first write down the points you're going to make in that conversation, how you wanted to feel, what are the main conversation arcs going to be, and then try to write that down. And don't get hung up on like spelling, grammar, or that quite yet. Just write down what you want to write first. Editing can come later to fix that stuff. And there's a second piece of advice that I would like to give. It's trust silence. Now, what do I mean by that? What I mean is that a lot of the time, some scenes are not allowed to be quiet in a lot of media. If I had to give an example, it would be something like Yes Minister, where a lot of the times there's conversations. No, 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 that's not a good example. Books, because they're not like stuff like films or video games or so on. They aren't they don't follow the same conventions. Characters have to talk, and there's a lot of dialogue in between. But sometimes I think it should be more encouraged to sometimes just like let nothing happen between conversation beats. Like say someone says um X, Y, and Z. Let there be a moment of pause, of quiet, of someone just breathing or doing something physical, like what you would do in real life, and then have the response come. Put like a beat of quiet in between really important points that you want to make. I think a really good example of this to get some inspiration for how to write dialogue would actually be to watch that drama, The Crown. It's probably one of the most boring television shows out there. I but I am a big fan of The Crown. I think my favorite seasons would be season 1 and season 2 with Claire Foy as Queen Elizabeth II. But I really like those no wait, yeah, from seasons 1 to 4. Those are my favorite it's my favorite show to watch because it helps me write dialogue in a more realistic frame, silences, stupid things people say, little remarks, and so on, little quirks of each person, and how each person's dialogue truly does feel like their own instead of just like, all of them speaking in the exact same tone or so on. Because sometimes in some pieces of media, that can feel that way, you know. I think a good example, for me personally, from my experiences, would be the Legend books where the main characters, June and Day, despite them being different people per se, they talked and felt the same. You could put each one interchangeably and they'd feel the same. And I think that's a common thing in lots of written works. So, yeah, it, for dialogue writing, trust the silence, but also get to a man. Just sit in silence and play out the scenes for yourself in your head. You know, it will help you out. It will help bring some creative energy to your brain. It will, make you feel more inspired, bring back some imagination to you, and just overall, it's a really helpful technique that I've learned myself that helped me really get to more writing and having more fun with it. Now, there are two final points I have left. Don't worry, this video isn't going to go on forever. But the first point I have is about the phrase, to be a great writer, you have to be a great reader. And that's absolutely true. And I really do agree with it. But I think instead of thinking of it quite literally, where, in order to be capable of writing, you have to be capable of being a good reader, you only have to read and all that stuff. No, I don't think that's true at all. I think alongside using that phrase in its proper form, which is, be able to read and stuff like that, I think you should also be reading books in order to learn the technical side of things. But if you're a type of person who doesn't just want to read books, but also play video games, get inspiration from them, or films or TV shows, or even, audio series and so on, it's quite useful to just go watch that type of media then. Because books can act as an inspiration, but it can also act as an instruction manual for, how to write, how to do things technically, how to write things properly, how to be grammatical, and so on and so forth. Use books as a guideline, a foundation, but you can get your inspiration from other things. If you're not the biggest reader, that's absolutely fine. I personally struggle a lot with reading because my attention span is fucked and so on. But you shouldn't let this sort of fear that, like, oh, I don't read enough, so therefore I won't be very good at writing. Don't let it be the thing that stops you. Use reading as a handbook to help you out. If you don't get much inspiration from books, That's fine. Get your inspiration from elsewhere. Video games, movies, TV shows. As long as you are getting inspired, that's the most important thing in the world. And that really matters. We need more writers because if we don't keep writing, then Jeff Bezos, Sam Altman, and all the other fucks are going to be using generative AI. I mean, Nick Carlson Press made a very good video recently about two fan made books on the Obsession movie, and holy shit, they were just used with AI, and it's really just a look into the future of what happens if less people get into writing and so on. Now, the final piece of advice I want to give is just, I think, something very important that people really need to start getting back into, which is that they should be having fun with their writing. You know, for a long time, something I really, really, really struggled with was this sort of idea that once I publish my first ever book, whenever that may be, um, I will get a publishing deal. I'm going to become rich and famous. I'm going to be really well known. I'm going to be a respected literature person. I'm going to be big in the author world. But it's that delusion, it's that way too high of an expectation that really held me back for a long time on my writing skills, on my passion, on my ideas, and so on. That sort of like self delusion kills passions, depending on what they are, and especially in something like writing or YouTube, as I mentioned in the beginning of the video. Um, it's this really just deluded worldview of that if you put enough work into something, you're instantly going to become famous. That isn't the case at all. You need to work hard on what on. You need to work hard on what you're doing in order to make it quality enough for people to want to go out there and check out what you want. But that is at a later date. You can think about those things later on. You can think about marketing, about publishing, and so on at a certain point. And when is that certain point? When you finish your book. And when you're writing your book, just have fun. Relax. It's not a race to the end. You got plenty of time to look over your work, to do some editing if you want to do it, to come with new ideas, to put in new concepts. When you're a person who does writing as a passion, you got all the time in the world before the scary editor comes along or the scary publishing industry goes and says, "Hey, what's that book you've written?" Because here's the truth: publishers don't come to authors, writers go to publishing when they believe that they have a good work down. And the only way you're going to have a good work down is if you've finished it. If you're passionate about it, if you're having fun, if you're enjoying what you're doing, if you're still learning in the process, if you're writing something that you believe that needs to be said, then that's going to be a good work. And I really hope that a lot of people out there take that into heart and that, we see more people getting into the hobby of writing because, I understand it totally. Writing can be very difficult sometimes, and that there may not be very many groups out there to, hang out with and, share writing or so on. And I learned that myself, and it's a very sad reality. Sometimes you just won't have the time or the friend group or the family space to get advice on or something like that. But in order to do any of that, you need to write. Just write first. Write in your own head, write down what you want, and just take your time. You're not in a rush, and once you're done, you can begin branching out to talking to people, to getting to editors, to getting to publishers. You're not being pressured into it. A lot of the time, what kills writing is self pressure. And, you know, I experienced that myself, and I don't want anyone else to feel the same way. So, yeah, Uh, that's my first video in a long, long time. Maybe slightly rambling and so on, but I don't have an editing program, so this is just the best you're gonna have to deal with for a while. I won't be publishing another video till like next week because I'm gonna be kicked out of this room. Um, so yeah. Uh, I wish you guys a lovely time and yeah, stay safe, get to writing, and just love yourself. Bye.